We are going to get started. You ready? Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming. Welcome to our library. If you haven't been here before, this is our meeting room. Rest of you, I think I've seen one of our events or another. I have just a little bit of housekeeping to do first. We do have a sign-in sheet. If you haven't signed in, it looks like a lot of you haven't, please go ahead and sign in once we get things rolling. Or on your way out. This keeps track of how many people are coming, and it goes into our report that we have to turn in.
And I apologize because I said if you want to be on the list, I forgot we need everybody.
Everybody has to be on the list. Yeah. Coffee is coming. I'll finish up. That's decaf over there right now. I'll make the real stuff is when she starts talking. And if you need a restroom, they're just right outside the door and to your left. Let's see. This project, that one, is one that we've been working on and we're sponsoring for the last year, and it's wrap-up time. It's called the White Lake Environmental History Project, and it included creating a website, and we've housed lots of things on that, including the interviews that some of you did for us, and Tanya did a whole lot of. It had our educational events listed on there and taped, Oscar in the back. Taped everything for us. I don't think it's taped anymore. Videoed everything for us. And then the oral history interviews themselves, and there are some documents that got scanned and got placed on there, and pictures. The goal of the whole project, there goes my voice, was to examine and understand the impact of White Lake's environmental history on the community. That was the main goal. Mine was to find out, okay, what happened before I got here. And most of all, to celebrate White Lake's recovery. We are completing the first stage of the project at the end of May, which this wraps that up just about. This evening's meeting is a way to show everybody in the community what we've done, where they can find it, and it gets us beginning to think about what we've learned so far. Hopefully we've learned what not to do and to go forward and keep the area clean and not repeat mistakes. And that's mostly it. When I got here 2 years ago, the place is just absolutely beautiful, and my husband and I roamed around and were just oohing and ahhing over everything. And I met Tanya, and she goes, "Oh, did you know about our past?" I went, "What past?" "We're coming off the list." "What list?" So she has talked to me and got me involved in this project, and she's been kind of a mentor for me to learn about the area, and she's been the underpinning of this whole project. So she's going to tell you the rest of the story.
Paul Hardy, right? Yes. So anyway, thank you, Shelley. I know you've got to make coffee now, but Shelley always downplays her role in this project. When I talked about this project and described it to her, kind of the ideas I had, she said, yes. You know, I'll take it to the board, and the board will say yes, and the board did say yes. So and she's been doing everything right along, so just a wonderful addition to the community. The oral history interviews, the goal is really just to get an idea of what was on people, to the best of our ability, what was on people's minds when we went through kind of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You know, if you've lived here all your life, you might think you know that, but I know I didn't, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about what happened. I wanted to hear stories, and what I have learned so far is that what happened is a whole lot different than what I thought. And when you hear it from people firsthand. And keep in mind, too, that a lot of the people who are talking will talk about things. These are not necessarily factual things, you know. We're not going to research and say, you know, this person had the wrong date or this person said the wrong thing about that. These are people's memories, their viewpoints, and the idea was to get a diverse group of viewpoints. So people who worked at the chemical companies, business people, people who were local activists, people who were maybe standing on the sidelines and wondering, just to tell us, you know, well, what were your thoughts? And so we actually had a committee. I've got a few people here. Terry, you want to stand up? Who actually helped with the interviewing. Terry, Bruce.
Halfway stand, I don't think you can walk.
Margot Payne is not here, his wife. Who else? Well, Dan Yanks is on our advisory committee. Roger's on the committee. Deb Hayes.
Yes.
And so, and we came up with, we went through a training and came up with questions, and for the most part, we had kind of a core group of questions that we asked everybody, unless we tried to get information about that individual. If we knew that they worked at a company or they had a specific experience, then we, went down that path too. We've interviewed over 30 people. We've learned a lot. Oscar Osbo, who's done all the videoing. They need to come up with a better word. He very kindly, I went through the interviews and just picked out, a minute here, 2 minutes here, just to kind of give a flavor of what the interviews are. And hopefully the goal is you'll go back to the website, you'll go back home and you'll look at them in full. And he's put that together, and I think it's about 25 minutes. And so after we see that, we're going to have a panel of about, well, it's going to be 8 people. We're missing Ken and Marion Mahoney, but I think they had a meeting that they might be coming too late. And I've got questions for them. Questions like, has your opinion changed after you viewed the interview? Just to kind of get a dialogue going. And keep in mind, it's not just for the people up here to answer these questions. I want to hear from people, in the audience too. So you don't need to sit there and just be quiet. Let's see. We plan to continue the project. We applied for another year of funding from the Michigan Humanities Council, which provided us the majority of funds for the first time. Didn't get it, so we're likely going to return. The person who came to evaluate us gave us all top marks and recommended we get that second year of funding, but it was a very competitive grant, and I think sometimes maybe they think it's better to give somebody else a new grant than somebody a year 2. But we're going to apply again. In the meantime, we're going to look at some local funds to make sure that we can maintain the website. So if somebody finds some, somebody wants us to put some materials or photos up, or if there's an interview that we feel we really need to do right away before the project, gets pretty active again, we can do that. So, and the second phase of the project would be some more interviews, more gathering of information, and actually the first draft of a book, putting a lot of these stories into a larger factual framework, just so people can see what happened. And the main point I want to make is it's not about digging up dirt and wallowing in our the bad things in the past. It's just understanding what happened in our community, why people felt this way or that. I think you'll be surprised by some of the things people said, and then using what we've learned to move forward. So we are going to listen to the video, and it's about 25 minutes long. Hope you enjoy it, and then we'll get our panel together.
When they tanned with natural materials, hemlock bark or whatever the bark was that they used at big quantities, that most used to come in with bark and stuff, and I think the smell came more after they started using chemicals. That's what I was told.
Interesting. Wow.
And I was thinking when it comes out of the tannery, it would come out like a big whoof sometimes.
The lagoons,
the smell.
It's kind of like the...
Well, anyway, nobody likes a tannery, except the workers. And as we talked against the tannery, it was never against anything like that, because it was just the smell. People worked there, and they were probably accustomed to it, but anyway.
In a picture. When Jerry had a boat, we went along the shore, and this was on the shore where they were dumping into the lake. And so I asked Janet the other day, I says, can Jerry dig up a couple of those pictures?
Oh my.
And
Okay.
they're-
All right. How did the changes affect you and your family or your business if you had one?
well, it really ruined the business. I mean, that part that people couldn't take it. That's
Did you take any action during the time of pollution, such as writing letters or contacting government officials?
I have a file.
make a copy of that one.
From 1975.
We have stuff in our house.
We did, but when we moved to the condo, I think between Debbie and Janet, they have most of that stuff. Hid someplace, but that's where I got it, was from Janet.
What kind of stuff? Did you write letters to the city or
I
to...
have them. Oh, yeah. City council. Mostly, I think, mostly our personal letters.
I used to go to the meetings that was between the DNR and the tannery on the pollution. That I can't remember exactly. It was in Grand Rapids or at Kellogg Center at Kalamazoo and so forth going. And then all of a sudden their next meeting was in Ironwood, western part of the Upper Peninsula. I think they just didn't want me to come anymore. That's the hint I got. Maybe that might not be it, but that's just the feeling I got.
Were they accommodating when you had these meetings? Did they listen to you? Did you believe that they were going to do anything to better it?
Oh, they were always going to, yeah, but just the DNR, they got along good. I'll put.
Were you, when you were young, let's say before you started working at the tannery, were you aware of White Lake's pollution problems?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of the pollution problems I've talked about since are false.
When did you first start hearing about pollution in the lake?
Well, I didn't hear about pollution in the lake till I started working in the tannery.
Okay.
Then I heard complaints about people talking about tannery polluting the lake. In fact, while I was working at the early days at the tannery, I got a call from a lady in Montague that said she heard that we were throwing spoiled hides in the lake. And I said to her, listen, lady, we couldn't afford to throw spoiled hides in the lake because we have a hard time getting any hides. So I said, we certainly wouldn't be throwing anything away, even if it was a little bit tainted.
That's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is the fact that we were able to buy that piece of property and the piece of property down by
by the mill pond?
by the mill pond there. So we spent a lot of money. I mean, maybe today I probably wouldn't be too popular on that, but I think we spent about $700,000 on land, and then we spent another $280,000 in legal fees suing the tannery and the state.
Well, how did that come about? I mean, it was in the news, there was a lot of public attention to it after this article came out. What made the city council decide to take action?
Just a willingness, I think, to want a cleaner environment, a clean town, and a clean lake. You know, we kind of made a commitment that when I was on council anyway, that we would do whatever we could to, you know, improve the, you know, I think we kind of thought green in a way. I'm not sure they do today. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, politics goes in waves. You'll have one group in there for a while, and when they fall out of favor, then you get the other one, and it just keeps going back and forth.
Like I say, White Lake and Muskegon Lake are kind of like twins in a way. Muskegon Lake is larger, but they both suffer the same consequences. They were listed as areas of concern by the IGC.
What was the community reaction when Went and Bob and people like you raised these issues?
Well, to start with, it was pretty, well, you know, non-committal. Oh, poo-poo, that kind of thing. Eventually, when they got Hooker involved, and it created enough pressure to where the plant actually closed down, people lost jobs. It got pretty nasty for a while. I remember Mary Mahoney was very involved in picketing out there. I think Ralph Rose even laid down in the road to keep vehicles from going out in and out of the plant gate.
And that was in relation to the Hooker chemical?
Yeah, that was Hooker, yeah.
So the tannery itself, people were not as much concerned about, but when the Hooker chemical issue came up?
Then they started getting concerned about what's happening to our lake.
The article in Audubon I thought was rather revealing. I know it's kind of boring to read things, but this is the one where basically they kind of realize that something's got to be done, and they come up with the vault, all right? And that it says Montague and the Temple of Doom. This is from the Audubon, 1985, September 85, okay. A massive pyramid enclosing 1 million cubic yards of toxic chemical waste rises near the shore of Michigan's White Lake, an everlasting reminder of how one community traded its clean, safe environment and pleasant wooded lake for an expanded tax base, 100 jobs, and deadly poisons in its air and water. And actually, you know, they said that this is something like the size of like something like, I wrote it down here. The base is 800 feet square. It's the size of 14 football fields. That's the Temple of Doom. And, you know, I sometimes feel like we all should go out and walk around it about every 3 years as a reminder of what's out there. And it's not something that's disappeared, it's there. And in this Audubon article, there's cross sections, etc. It's built like an Aztec temple with different layers, etc. And it's amazing.
Just the perspective that I gained from this is that we just need to be responsible with what we do, whether it could be anything from a citizen, you know, throwing trash out of their car, causing that kind of a environmental eyesore, to industry behaving in a responsible way.
I think that White Lake is becoming a very healthy lake. I think fishing has improved. I think if you listen to the people from Grand Valley, they'll tell you that it's much healthier, and I think it's come a long way, and it's done very well. And it still has a ways to go, but I think that it has. We've gained an awful lot, and we've come a long way, and I think we're a long ways back towards being able to. And it was my thing at one time. I tried to get everyone to put on White Lake the Beautiful on their stationery, because if you don't blow your own horn, who's going to? And the cities, the townships, the businesses, everyone should have that on their envelopes, their letters. Whitehall on White Lake the Beautiful, Montague, and so on. Because if we don't say that, who else is going to? And I think we need to work to overcome that image of having a bad environmental image, because we have come a long way.
I think I became much more aware of it when I started reading more and more about what was happening to the people that lived around Love Canal. And I certainly supported my husband wholeheartedly, even though I didn't participate in any of the demonstrations, because, well, I walked the fine line with my own family because my brother worked for the chemical plants. And I wish to inject something here, that the community was very provincial, and naive. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I actually mean it in a very admirable way. They couldn't believe Hooker could possibly do something undercover and behind people's back that were going to destroy the beauty and pollute the community. So they believed everything that Hooker fed them, which we later found out a lot of them were lies. And but the community was of the old mindset where when you shook hands on something, a handshake was a binding contract. And I don't think the community, many in the community could possibly believe that Hooker would do something undermined. And of course we all know they did.
When did you first remember hearing about pollution associated with White Lake or Hooker Chemical?
I don't exactly know how to answer that question. I guess after the plant became operational, we knew intellectually that where there were chemical industries, there were pollutions. At that time, we still thought of things going away. We weren't aware that there is no away. And I think that there was a definite loyalty of employees to their employer. People didn't switch jobs. They stayed with the one company and were promoted from within. It was totally different at that time. And growing up in Niagara Falls, where pollution was just a way of life.
When did you become aware of pollution issues related to White Lake?
I was pretty young when we always knew Hooker. We didn't know the extent of the problems that they were creating, but they had emissions that we could smell. Our driveway's half mile long, so there's certain things that didn't come in this far, but we could smell. It was kind of a sweet smell, and when we smelled the emissions, my mom would call, and Mrs. Johnson, I remember, were the ladies in the neighborhood that mostly would call to alert them that, you know, maybe they had a problem. So
they called Hooker Chemical?
Yeah, I think there was a Mr. Colpois that they talked to. I can't think of his first name, but that was his name. Mr. Colpois was kind of their PR man, so.
Oh, Dwayne Colpois.
Okay, all right.
The plant manager.
Right.
Were you aware of any other effects from the pollution? I know we heard people talk about trees that were damaged by pollution discharges.
I was pretty young when that happened, but I do remember it. We had taken a trip as a family to the UP. My dad always wanted to go up north if we went anywhere. If we weren't at the cottage, we'd take a little trip once in a great while. Normally we're just happy to be here, but yeah, we came home and everything was brown from Old Channel Trail, like halfway to the lake up our property. Everything had been, it wasn't, I'm not sure that it was all defoliated, but everything turned brown. The pine needles turned brown, and a lot of our pine trees never came back. And there was a settlement. They gave us, it was probably a lot of money back then, a couple $1,000s. I remember my mom buying us a chainsaw with the settlement money, and we had to keep track of our hours. My older brothers were old enough to run a chainsaw, so for several winters, all 5 of us kids were cutting and burning treetops and just cleaning up the mess that was left. Most of the hardwood trees all came back, but I think it damaged the trees. You know, you can't defoliate a tree in the middle of the summer and not have it cause some damage, permanent damage. So
when I first knew about the chemical companies moving here, I was in high school because I graduated high school in 1960. And one of my really good friends was a young woman named Peggy Crock, and she and her family had moved here in about 9th grade because her father was either a chemist or a manager at DuPont. And so what my first introduction to the chemical companies was through Peggy, and going over to her house, and she had this beautiful house, and her parents were such lovely, educated people, so that I just thought very highly of that the chemical companies were coming and bringing educated people and really nice people to our area.
Because of whatever they were emitting into the air. I used to ask the plant manager about that, and Hooker always blamed DuPont, and DuPont would blame Hooker. So I never did find out what I was breathing, but I often wondered what it was, but it took your breath away.
What was your understanding of the pollution problem from talking to Wind and Bob, or just hearing it from other people in the community?
That it was serious. It was polluting water supplies and the lake, of course. And the type of pollution in the lake was, not the fertilizer stuff, but things you couldn't see, and contaminating, fish and wildlife, and might be a permanent situation.
Observer, yes, that's right. All the articles were written about Hooker coming in, and the mentions of my grandfather here and there, because he started a group called the White Lake Improvement Association, which was 13 property owners to fight Hooker. Of course, he had the most to lose because Hooker had purchased a property, which was Dowie Point, the old Dowie property, which was purchased from Dowie by Struven. So Struven actually owned the property that was right next to his, that included Dowie Point. And so he had the most to lose if there was going to be a factory built right next to his home on the bluff and our cottage down there. So he started the White Lake Improvement Association, which was 13 land property owners. And I'm sure his main concern, of course, was the value of this property, and so were the other ones. But he also, I know, was thinking about the environment, because I just know who he is. And there was one quote where he said they wanted to make sure that the lake stayed good for boating and fishing and recreation. So I'm sure that's what he's thinking of, was the environmental impact.
I would go ahead and say it was probably even when I was like 11 or 12 when I first came up here. You weren't that aware of anything, but I can just remember the smell at certain times if you were laying in bed and the wind was blowing in a certain direction. You could go ahead and smell it, or when you'd be driving by on the road if the wind was in the right direction.
What did it smell like?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and for me, I guess what I remember is just, if you drove through Gary, you have a chemical smell. It was that kind. It was just not a pleasant smell. I think that would be the best way of describing it, at least from what I can remember.
And as a young boy, you noticed that, but you didn't really associate it with pollution?
Not really. All you knew is that the chemical companies, were here, and you just knew it wasn't a great smell, but you would that was just part of the area. For 98% of the time, or 99% of the time, it wasn't even a factor, for me anyways, in being here.
Yeah, there was mistakes made at that time.
Well, as a worker, did you ever wonder about the practices, or did you just trust that they knew what they were doing?
No, it didn't bother us any. We knew that if we had a chlorine leak, that you had to fix it right quick, because chlorine is deadly. And we had gas masks that we could wear. And So there's 4 chemicals, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine, that are the most deadly chemicals, and we had fluorine in our reactor in DuPont, and we made chlorine at Hooker. So we had 2 of the most deadly chemicals known to man, and we handled them good. Like I say, occasionally we had a leak, but we fixed it. And other than that, nobody had any concern about their health. I'm 76, so I guess if anybody should be dead, I should be dead by now if, if those chemicals were something that was going to kill you down the road.
When you put things out back at Hooker, did anybody raise questions about that?
No.
And what did you think of the job? Was it a good job?
I loved the job. I probably had, if I was younger and didn't have a family, I might have gone into total chemistry.
Did you have that kind of a background for the job?
No, just went in and learned.
Do you remember, or are you comfortable sharing your pay rate? Or?
It wasn't good, but it was good to me in those days, of course. Like I say, I was raised during the Depression, and that money was good. Yeah. And it was for everyone. There wasn't a lot of money around at that time either, when I first was employed there.
Do you remember when that may have been?
I think it was about 1958 when I was there first. See, Hooker was very young at that time in the area.
Do you recall any of your first thoughts when you heard of DuPont and, well, actually Hooker Chemical and some of the other chemical companies coming to town?
Of course, it was a good thing for Montague. Everybody was welcoming.
Do you remember anything that people said, or?
No, I don't. Not particularly.
You know, but people were feeling good about it.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Do you have any memories of, or want to talk at all about the controversy when concerns about pollution came up?
You know, I think it's my opinion that there was a degree of innocence. They really, I don't believe they knew much about the hydrocarbons at that time. And this was a good place because of the salt and the water, which was needed for the processes.
We hear every side, and they were all strong in their views.
Until our friends over in Montague could not drink the water.
Yeah, then we really
became. So you had friends in the Montague area?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who had contaminated
Blueberry Ridge
area.
area.
Okay. And we've interviewed them, some of them also.
Mm-hmm.
What were your concerns about the pollution? Did you have any specific concerns about how it might affect you or your family or the community?
Very much so. I did not allow the children to swim in the lake at that time.
Yeah, when that all
you know,
came
so
out.
we were concerned for our immediate family.
And there was issues, I think, talked about. They said there was more lupus in the area than other areas, and birth defects, this type of thing, which I don't know if proved true or not, but there was that
well,
thought.
they're still, you know,
Yeah.
checking on the cancer thing.
What did you think of the local protests about pollution? Because at certain times there were, you know, some pretty vociferous protests.
Yes, there were.
We privately supported them.
Yeah.
We were in our late 20s. You know, we built our first house. We had little kids. You know, I had been raised that, you know, when people told you, you know, this was happening, oh, okay, you know, I mean, it was the same with like doctors. If you went to a doctor and he said you take this, this, and this, no, you never questioned that kind of stuff. Not until, you know, we were on bottled water did we all finally get, oh, come on, no, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They are giving water to 12 or
reason.
15,
Yeah.
water to us, there's a reason for this. And so that's when we started really trying to organize and, Bev and I, at the time, I don't remember what our positions were in the association, but we started writing letters to anybody that we thought could be of assistance. I mean, after we talked to the city, we talked to the township, we wrote letters to the state, to all of our legislators, Guy.
When it really broke that something was going on here was I had a call from an AP reporter, and I told her everything that was happening here. They had not been getting that information in Niagara Falls. The plant manager here was kind of keeping it under the table, trying to save his job, I guess. But this AP reporter wrote an article, and it went all over. And the president or whoever in Niagara Falls called me at my home and called me a liar. Said, this is not happening there, you are lying. I said, well, then come visit us. And remember, he came out, and then all of a sudden they started getting very, very nice to us, and he realized the plant was in deep trouble, and his plant manager had not been giving them all the information.
Did you have another time where there was a leak where you had to evacuate?
Yeah, this one was interesting. It was after my father first started working there, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and when we were kids, my folks never went to movies. We got TVs, they never went to movies. Entertainment was a kind of fun thing was take a ride. And my father never ceased to amaze us. He would take us on a ride somewhere, and we'd go off in the backwoods on 2 tracks on roads we'd never seen before. I mean, we knew the lakeshore all the way to Ludington. I knew every 2 track and every road north of Montague all the way to Ludington from a kid. But you go off toward Mesquite or Newaygo and those areas out there, he would take us off in those directions, and he hunted and fished out there. And we had hardly ever been there. We'd go to beautiful rollaways over the Muskegon River. We'd take rides. Well, all of a sudden, we get a phone call, and he answers the phone, and and okay, kids, we're going for a ride. We took off. Jumped in the car, yay, we took off, because we knew if we took off on a ride, we'd end up someplace where we'd either get a nice meal or some hot fudge sundae or something like that. It was kind of cool. And it must have been during school. It must have been in the fall or spring. I can't remember which. So we took off on this unexpected, boom, ride. Well, it was fun. Got back, and the next day I went to school, Sunday, and I got talking with my friends who lived up and down Whitbeck, 2 of them, 1 male, 1 female, and they too went for a ride that Sunday afternoon. And we started asking questions. Of course, we were like, 7, 8, 9, we were pretty precocious, and there had been a leak. And so they had called the employees that lived, of course, the prevailing wind is out of the south, and we lived north of Hooker on Whitbeck. And and then of course we're all sitting around going, well, what about all our neighbors? What about our friends? They did not have they didn't work at Hooker. They didn't get that phone call.
And I think it reflects the Great Lakes has become a priority. A lot like what the old Chesapeake Bay effort was in the Everglades. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, federal Congress and the agencies are putting in their effort to restore, and delist these areas of concern around the Great Lakes. So it's showing the results of that effort, and that hasn't necessarily just been because they recognize that. The community, people around the Great Lakes, our public advisory councils all play a role in that, of sending that message to our elected officials. You have the money. It's where you're putting it. It's the priority. That's important. let's take care of this. Let's get this taken care of. It's been 87, that's 26 years. I never thought it would take that long. I never in a heartbeat thought it would take, when we started in the 90s. I kind of figured, maybe 2005, but boy, it's 12 years, and there's no way it could take that long.
So what do you hope this project brings to future residents?
Well, what I'm hoping is that, you know, we were put on the map for pollution in the late 70s and early 80s. We were put on the national map. We were a poster child for pollution. And, you know, it's just what happened. I'd like us to be back on the map as a poster child for recovery. And I would like this book to lay out that story.
I would think, going back to hers, you know, it has to be a local vigilance on things. You can't assume that the state and federal government or even local government is going to protect the environment. You have to be vigilant. There are agencies, they will help you, but they don't have the wherewithal normally, nor the concern, unless you squawk.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, don't worry, you know, if you think, oh, well, you're not educated enough to do this. If you know right and wrong, and do whatever you can do to make phone calls or whatever.
You can see definitely some distinct perspectives coming out. So I was very glad, for example, that the workers actually did agree to speak to me, the ones that some of them didn't. But I just said to them, I said, you know, I'm going to follow your lead. If you want to talk about the positive aspects of working there, that's fine. And if it's okay for me to ask about the pollution issues, you know, I'll do that. But if it's not, you know, and some of the people that I called and talked to were not interested in participating. So anyway, we can have our piano sit up here, and you guys can grab something to drink if you want. Starting at the right, we have Dan Yates, who is former professor of history at MCC and has written so many history books I couldn't name them anymore. As soon as he's done with one, he's involved with another.
4 in the project.
4, okay. He's been an advisor on our project, which we've been very grateful for. Dan Dewar is a newcomer and has been on the Vreeland Township Board and is also a member of the White Lake Public Advisory Council working to clean up the lake. Roger, what to say about Roger?
Oh boy, where do you start?
Yeah.
Roger is historian for the White Lake Area Historical Society, and he served as one of our advisory committee members. Claire Schlapp also was on our advisory committee and is a member of the White Lake Public Advisory Council. Norm, I think, was a member of our advisory council. I don't know, did you come?
Yeah, he was.
And then Norm, I know he did. I'm just teasing him. He did miss a few. And Norm is former.
Trying to retire.
Former city Whitehall mayor and a lot of other things. And then Dan Parker is. How long have you been back in the area?
10 years.
Oh gosh, I didn't know.
I know it. Yeah. I've been back 10 years, but yeah.
Well, Dan actually I met years ago when I was involved with local environmental things, and he was from Spring Lake, but he's a Montague boy. You probably recognize him seeing him on the video, and very active in local environmental issues. So we've got a whole bunch of questions, and we don't have to use them unless we need to, but Shelley and I put together a whole bunch just because we didn't want to sit here and struggle with questions. So first question is, has viewing, and we did encourage them to look at all the interviews too. So we told them there was going to be a test. So first question is, has viewing the interviews changed your attitudes or opinions about what happened during the chemical industrial pollution area? And who would like to just jump right in?
Might as well. I think it's reinforced some things. There were the comment that was made by the Mahoneys, and I wish they were here because Mary along with Ralph Rose, are two of the people that went to jail, laying down in front of the trucks. That it was an abomination. The judge ordered the stuff that had been hauled away from Hooker, brought back from the other side of the state, and as you told me I didn't say in my interview, no one went to jail. The judge should have gone to jail. And it's interesting. I met a fellow who works for Spectrum Health, which is the medical examiner for Muskegon County, and he said, from Whitehall. He said, "Oh, do you know the Mahoneys?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I'll never forget 7th grade algebra, or 8th or something." He said, "My instructor, Mr. Mahoney, got called out of class. He had to go and bail his wife out of jail." And it was Hooker.
We found out that was an urban myth, because we asked Mary about that on the interview. She said she had planned on it. They had decided she was going to be, and Ralph Rose said, "No, I will do it." So Ralph Rose did it. But they weren't going to actually arrest him because he was a judge.
But they did.
And he said, "No, arrest me."
And the call went to the school that Ken was at, that his wife had been arrested. I think that it's you have to be eternally vigilant locally, and I don't think things will get done unless you have local activists, and we've had a lot of them. And I think that's the key to the whole thing. I was talking with Tom there, who's been involved in everything, and Jim Fortney, who I ran into just within the past month, was the DNR, DEQ, they go back and forth so many times. We stood down at the tannery site, and he said, "I can take you to places that are far worse than this in the state of Michigan, and not a single thing is being done." And it's simply because of the efforts of the citizens of the White Lake area, I think, that the things that have been done and have been accomplished have been accomplished. If you just sit back and say, "Well, they'll take care of us," it will never happen.
Well, I'm going to sound a little bit out of it. I think courage. The courage of Mrs. Hannah, Mrs. Hunt. Mary said it very well on that last clip. You don't have to have a big fancy degree or anything like that. These were teachers and housewives, and they just got out and wrote letters, and they had a lot of courage. They had a lot of guts, a lot of courage. And back in those days, around the kitchen table with my family, and a lot of brother-in-law and all that were on those videos. There's a part of my family. It was a little contentious at times. But yeah, a lot of courage. I give those people a lot of credit for what they did back in that era and at those times.
Well, Dan actually, Dan's brother-in-law was the man who worked at Hooker, Frank Lehman. The woman who talked about the area being provincial in a good way, that was Frank Lehman's sister, so it's very incestuous with Dan there. So, and anybody else want to respond to this question? And you don't have to respond to every question.
Well, the brave part, I was not arrested or even protesting, but the hard part was that most of our community leaders, the well-respected people in town, were supporting Hooker and DuPont. Our church, of course, was a cross-section, Montague Methodist, was a cross-section of these competing groups. The Parkers were members of the church. But we also had Wendell Lipka. Wendell ran a local insurance. He was Mr. White Lake, basically, along with Clarence Pitkin before him. And they were gung-ho support. I mean, they went out of their way to bring Hooker to town, and DuPont as well, and very proud of it. And then all the people who came because of Hooker came to this area. So when you're talking about people standing up again, well, the Roses were members of the church. Yeah. I mean, many of them were all members of that same church, and here they are. I'm on the administrative board right now of that church. I can imagine some of this spilled over, you know. I wasn't a member then. But that's the kind of contentiousness you had. These are neighbors dealing with neighbors, old-timers dealing with newcomers. I mean, it was a truly exciting time. Not necessarily for the best of reasons, but that's the kind of conditions you had then.
Tanya, also, I don't know if people watched the segment that I did. I went through some of the early materials because somehow the family's always been involved in the community, and I quote the Methodist Church Bulletin saying, you know, we are so happy that somehow Hooker's coming to town, and on and on and on, and it was like, you know, they referred to Arthur Meyer as the one-man chamber of commerce. Thank goodness he was here, etc. And the salt and the water, and then watching the interviews, I also, it was kind of interesting. I was not here because I was living in California most of the time. But anyway, you think of, you know, well, why didn't so-and-so say something, or why didn't? And then, as I mentioned also in my talk, is that basically, in small towns, there are very few people who can speak out, you know, and as I mentioned in my talk, you own the hardware store, you own this, you do that, etc. Because of the church, because of something else, because of, you know, Wendell Lipke might have a note on your real estate that you just bought or something like that. You know, you can't speak out, and so it's just amazing, the silence that lasted so long. But once again, it's tied to money and income, so it's very complex, and we couldn't believe it.
This was Dr. Paul Voss, who was one of the interviews that you showed. I thought, if you listen to his entire tape, I thought he made a very interesting point, because he, like many others in the community at that time, I'm sure, was a real skeptic, and he did not believe what Dahlstrom was saying and what others were saying, but he was a skeptic with a very open mind, and the more that he heard and the more that the activists back then talked about it, he listened and totally changed his position. And it's rather interesting, I thought, to hear someone like that who was very skeptical, who didn't believe that Hooker and DuPont were polluting the area, change his thinking, and how his thinking evolved to one where he realized that the stories were in large part true.
It's interesting. It's interesting to go through all the interviews, because sometimes you'll see, you know, it's human nature, but you'll see some contradictions in it too. You know, where somebody might have been impressed with the, you know, the citizen activism is what, you know, helped them change their mind, but then at the end of the interview, when you ask, well, what do you think needs to be done, you know, that same person might say, I don't like these citizen groups. You know, they're not putting those two things together. So
when I was watching Chick Caluwaert's interview, I had this thought. Our mothers taught us to be nice, and he was so nice, and he talked about coming here as a child, and then going through that period where the lake was overrun with weeds, and he said you'd go out there and you'd try to water ski and you'd have weeds all over, and he said you adjust, and then or you would get in the boat and go out to the big lake and go there. You adjust, and that's what we do, you know, and we're still doing it. There are things going on now, maybe not in our community, but elsewhere in the world, and we adjust to it. Well, like women and children aren't supposed to eat fish more than once a week because of the mercury, and that's not just here, that's everywhere. Well, okay, we accept that now, and we only eat fish once a week, or, you know, but then he did say, then he did get to a point where he thought, maybe I should use my voice.
and speak out.
What thoughts from the audience on, you know, if you know, maybe the video clips, or if you've seen any of the interviews?
I just want to thank Roger for something he brought to us as a committee of interviewers. The newspaper clippings from around the time of the arrival of the companies, the welcoming, the you know, real estate boom, the banking, and the other interests in town who were welcoming this, and the you know, the construction of new schools in both Whitehall and Montague during that period, the census data, the other indicators of growth in the immediate area, because that helped us to understand enough when we were going to be asking our questions of the momentum. You've all touched on the courage or the silence or the going along to get along. There was a lot of momentum there from that planned publicity on the part of some of the companies. You know, they were putting their best foot forward, you know, the shovels for you know, groundbreaking photographs, that sort of stuff. You get a certain amount of momentum going even before any paychecks are issued that tends toward the silence and the acceptance that people are talking about here.
Well, and you also get a sense of how different the community was. You know, an agrarian, you know, based on the agriculture. You know, Frank Lehman, who was one of the workers interviewed, he mentioned that he could see, you know, less than half a mile away the farm he was born on, and he's on 200 acres, you know, but, you know, just, and then listening to Edie talk about this is where you shake hands with somebody.
And the people they brought into the community were involved in the community. They were on the school boards, both Montague, Whitehall, city councils, township boards, all the other community organizations. They were very involved people, and they brought a lot into the community in that respect.
Degrees and things. Yeah, but how did we get the audience?
Okay. One more quick thing, as a hooker kid, that's my tag on there. They had summer picnics. They would rent the park theater for the whole Saturday morning before Christmas. They had cartoons, and we'd stuff ourselves on popcorn, and every kid got a present. So they did a lot of that kind of stuff.
Other comments?
I'm taken back by how innocent people really were, because back then we didn't know how these long-term effects would change the community, change the health of the whole system. Now we know, and you know, hopefully we're not going to make those same mistakes again. However, other communities might, but there's a reason. Like my father worked in the chemical industry his whole life, and I know they were just dumping heavy metals in the Grand River forever, and they thought that was okay because, like this woman said, well, we just thought it went away.
And that was Rosemary Davidson Vreeland, who came with her husband to the area. She was my sixth grade teacher. And she was a sharp cookie, you know. So for her to think away is interesting.
The model is still with us. Midland, the Tittabawassee and Chippewa River, and the dioxin problem generated by Dow, and the pressure school board members, city council members, local and state government officials who are sponsored by, I will say it that way, to be a member of the House or the Senate from that part of Michigan, you better be sponsored by the right corporation or you won't get elected. And officials in Lansing, the Attorney General currently, and others, and therefore there's resistance. And the model here of citizens speaking up exists elsewhere and takes a whole lot of time to ever succeed.
I'm going to ask.
Pete has a question.
Oh, Pete, sorry.
Yes, back in those days, you know, I was sort of a farm boy, city boy, small town, all that good stuff. And things were pretty calm. I mean, we didn't, as far as chemicals and that, as far as we know, there wasn't anything that was harmful. We changed the oil on the vehicle, we pour it on the ground or something. You go out and put it or do this or that, you know. I mean, brown big, it's going to take care of this stuff, you know. The concept that everything is biodegradable, you know, was more or less just, that's, you know, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, you know, put it in a lake, I mean, this little amount, big lake, you know, it's going to all mix in, you know, everything will be the same as it was in a week, you know, or whatever. So it was just naive, but that was the era that we didn't know, or I didn't know, and you know, I associated with it, didn't realize the potential of damage and that these chemicals make. It was like, you know, mechanical or something, you mix chemicals together, well, they can be separated, you know, or they can, you bolt something, you know, mechanic-wise, you bolt this to there, well, if you want to take it apart, take it apart. It wasn't, you know, so everything was adjustable. And, you know, so, I don't know, it was an innocence, definitely. I mean, it was just, so.
Yeah, I think that certainly comes
Poor
across.
towns and that, economic development, my gosh, you know, people coming out of recession and that, get some money coming to town, oh my gosh, we're going to start being humans.
Well, I agree with Pete and with a number of other people. I believe that it started out innocent, but it didn't end up innocent. There were intentional mistruths and a lot of information kept from the community. And I've been to both of your shows so far. And I've appreciated them, and I've learned a great deal from them. And I thought one interesting comment and perspective is that when Hooker put up the fence, was it keeping the community out, keeping the employees in? What was the purpose of it? And I think that we discovered that, you know, through interviews. But my perspective, the perspective that I find interesting today in this short clip, and I got here late, I apologize, but a 98-year-old woman that worked there and is healthy and sharp and intact. And then you, on the other end of the spectrum, you have those that have sued due to cancer and health issues. Is anyone on the panel, can anyone speak to that? I mean, you have people that work for many, many, many years there, very healthy, still today, almost 100 years old, and others that have passed away due to cancer-causing agents in their 40s.
Dexter King was 99 when he was interviewed, and he started at the bottom of the tannery, and by the time he was done after 43 years, he was the manager of the entire thing.
But then on the other hand, you have others that have died and sued as a result. So.
I'm not aware of any lawsuits. So.
Well, maybe not here.
Not here.
Not here.
So can
I don't think that question will be answered in any of our lifetimes.
No.
Why some people get cancer and others don't when they're exposed to the same things.
So it's kind of a gene pool thing.
But,
I don't know, you know.
But I'm pretty convinced that if there are exposures and, you know, people are exposed, some people are going to get sick from it.
And you have the workers' comp system. So you make a deal when you're an employee and an employer that we won't go to circuit court, we'll go through workers' comp. So if you ever look in the index, there's a couple of leading cases under the name Whitehall Leather Company that are leading cases in the areas of workers' comp in Michigan. And ditto with Hooker Chemical. So you've got to be looking in the right place. So when you say lawsuit, you really mean workers' comp claim.
Nope.
Just in the note on sickness and illness and poisons. If you're working at a place that's processing this stuff and it's there, and as one of the people mentioned, they had gas masks to put on if they thought they needed to. You're there, and there's some degree of effort made to offer you protections against the things that are around there, because they're aware that they're there. But outside the fence, the citizenry out there is like, everything must be fine there. And I don't have to worry about it. I'm hundreds of yards away from this. And they're exposed to almost identical things, but they're never reaching for a gas mask. They're never saying, what am I ingesting into my body? How much of this am I drinking? A little bit of water. I mean, these kinds of things. So, you know, it's not uncommon at all to have, and I don't know the history of illness in this area, but it's not uncommon at all to have workers at a plant perfectly healthy and have people in the community not from the exact same thing, because the workers are not exposed to it by design. If they were all getting sick, the plant would have to answer for that.
Although when I've talked to epidemiologists, they usually say, in general, according to our standards, OSHA, workers are the most exposed, you know, and depending on whether they use the equipment, just because our standards allow for higher exposures of chemicals to the workers and always have. But, you know, but it is really, you know, there's so much in our lifestyle.
Studies of workers, they will usually admit that there's this thing called the healthy worker effect, which they're generally healthier anyway than the regular population because they're healthy enough to be working.
Right.
So you have that. And also we're finding out now that how much more vulnerable children are, because they can be exposed to the same thing in the air, but pound for pound, it's a higher dosage
they're developing
to them.
They're still developing too. Steve, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, one of the lessons is, you know, to look at what we learn from the experience. You know, it's not just chemical pollution and degradation that, you know, settles itself in our small community. You know, jobs, and people start selling, whether it's their clean air, or their clean water, or their neighborhoods, or the quality of their town, you know, for jobs. I get it. I need to work just like anybody else does. But, you know, there's other things, particularly on the White Lake horizon, other than chemical companies, that really represent a form of pollution.
I wanted to mention, just in case people haven't seen the tragedy of White Lake, which is on the website, both videos that we showed at the home. One thing that just struck me, and I'm not really on the panel, but I'm going to is the privilege of the moderator.
You're moderately privileged, yes.
I'm exceptionally privileged. But one thing that struck me was the interview with Warren Dobson, who worked at the chemical company.
Yeah, that was remarkable.
And I think, you know, and I'm not judging people, but what I'm saying is that here's someone who, he was bothered by what he was doing in his job for quite a long time, and then decided that he could no longer participate. So he quit his job for that reason, and he also was the whistleblower. He was the one who, and from what I can tell, you know, that was one big reason that the state came to town, because he said, you got to come here and look around. There were a number of things going on, and he left the area. But my question is, you know, this was one worker who worked there and was bothered by it. What's the difference between, you know, Warren Dobson and other people? He had a family, you know, he needed a job. And like I said, I'm not asking it in a judgmental way, but it makes you wonder why one and not another. And somebody said, well, maybe he was more moral, and I thought, well, the rest, 200, you know, 100 people didn't have any morals? No.
But you can, yeah, and you can say that about all of us.
Yeah.
In the 80s, when the protests were going on about the cleanup, I read about it in the paper. I wasn't there.
Or in 2013. Some people are activists as Norm said, and some aren't. Today we have fracking, we have Walmarts, we have those that are for wind turbines and those that are against it. So I don't think it's
But we
a
can
matter
become-
of morals or values.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it is. I thought it was funny that
Yeah.
someone said that, because it's like, you know, you can't really broad brush on what people that.
I think that's the status quo. You get yourself in a position where here's my life.
You're
I'm
comfortable.
most of it going on here, and somebody starts judging out of this is going. You know what? I'm going to close my ears to that, and I'm going to let that go. And I'm not going to. And I'm going to live with the. What did I? You know, I hear my boss say something. Plausible deniability comes into. Oh, you know what? I'm going to let that go because they say it's okay, and I'm just going to take their word for it because if I have to do with this other guy, if I open my mind up, I'm going to have to confront this. If I have to confront it, it's going to upset the life that I have. And it's going to, it might mean I don't have a job anymore. It might mean everything changes, and I'm not prepared for that. That's what most people are like in their lives. They just are not prepared to make dramatic changes to their life, and opening their eyes will often do that.
And it did seem like, you know, when you worked for a company back then, you did work for them your whole life.
I was quoted one time, and I said, the worst thing about the search for the truth is sometimes finding it.
Yeah. Tanya?
Okay.
I think that it's a process, and it can be a long process. I think, you know, when Dahlstrom was screaming in the wilderness, along with Bob Wesley and a few other people, and it was, you know, in 1975, when the Svenssons came to the White House City Council, I was on the City Council. If you'd have doubled my age, I would have still been the youngest council member. That's bad. And I can remember a couple of those people saying, and all the rest of them are dead now, so, you know, I guess what I say I have to stand. And I can remember a couple of them saying, we have to protect those jobs. That was the whole issue. And I sat there and I'm trying to figure this all out, because I really wasn't involved in the environmental thing. Went would, I guess he thought there was a glimmer of hope for me. He would drag me into his office. He'd see me downtown, and he had these bottles. You must have experienced Mund's bottles.
Oh, yeah.
And he would unscrew them, and he'd stick them under your nose. And he'd say, this is coming out of the pipe that the tannery's dumping into the lake. And this one's coming from here and here. And, you know, you sit and look at it, and he said, you know, it's terrible. And all these people are talking in you know, all these technical terms. And he'd say, look, they're whizzing in your well. Well, he said it far more graphically. He said, is that right? You know? And he said, you don't have to be a scientist, to have a science degree. Although he went back to school and got a degree at Grand Valley just so he could be knowledgeable. And I think it was a long process. You know, you don't just wake up and say, yeah, this is all wrong. And I guess I've gotten to the point now where I find it hard to believe anything the government says. I really am there. And you know, I don't trust any of those people anymore. If they tell me something that that sheet of paper is white, I'm going to ask a couple people to confirm it. That's the way it is.
Yeah, my comment would be you know, picking up what was said over there, that you know, the whole, when it's all said and done, there's a responsibility to community, and you must speak out, and that somehow you have an obligation to speak out, and that somehow, you know, I look around the room, I have white hair. I mean, what are all these old people doing in this room talking about, you know, the environment? Basically, how many more years do we have left, and where are the young people? And hello, I'm young. Yeah, it's amazing what the camera did to you when you looked at your face and thought, oh my God, is that me? But anyway,
Who's that guy?
yeah, who is that wrinkled old dude? It's horrible. God. But anyway, you know, the idea that somehow speaking out, you must speak out in community involvement, and if there's anything that's going to come through, it's that you must do that. And you know, I can't do that because I'm 36 years old. I have 3 children. My wife works, and you know, everyone's too busy to do something. And also, you know, if you do get involved, you know, what's going to happen when you go to church on Sunday, or when you go down to the store, when you go down to the coffee, whatever kind of thing. You know, I made the comment in my interview, you know, you go down to the coffee house in the morning, they're all there talking. Would they come to a city council meeting and say something if you've been in a city council? No. And the answer is, you must do that.
Yes, thank you.
Yay. Well, that's what it is.
I'm going to combine, I'm going to make it tough on you this time. And I'm going to ask you to keep your answers succinct. And the question is, I want you to answer both of them. Did anything surprise you about the interviews? And then 2, did you gain any new knowledge? So answer with both of those. Is there something that you learned from the interviews?
Yeah, I'll speak out again.
Well, I was going to call on Dan.
Yeah, no, go ahead with Dan. Dan, yeah.
Well, I learned a lot of new things. I was amazed at how many of these people I knew. Of course, I was on the committee, but I didn't recommend really any of these people. Some of the people I recommended didn't get interviewed. So that was something that amazed me. And I learned new things about the people that I did know. I know Dan, for example, from his parents and his sister, and I didn't know he was involved, and I didn't know that his father worked for Hooker. I figured he was just a dairy farmer. I mean, yeah. Not that there's wonderful profession, but I thought that was what he did for a living. And of course, but it makes sense because he can't make a living on a dairy farm any longer. And those farmers were all forced to go to work in Muskegon or in Whitehall or White Lake. So I learned about that. And then, I was surprised there were as many advocates for the for Hooker and for the tannery. I mean, my connections are with vociferous people who could talk a blue streak. Harry Pillinger, for example, didn't have one good word to say about the tannery. Devoted much of his life to getting back at him whenever he could. If you don't know Harry, he was a local character. Yeah. If anything, it'd be nice to get even more reaction from the manufacturer, the pro-chemical group, because there's a fair amount to be said for that perspective. I don't agree with it, but that doesn't mean that those elements have not contributed to the community in many ways. Not in pollution, but in terms of bringing people into the community, adding to the tax base, all of those other things.
Well, if you listen to Dexter King's interview, and then Dexter's interviewed with Rex, because I wanted to interview Rex, and Rex wanted Dexter to put the two together. But if you listen to Dexter King's interview, he said during the Depression there were 175 jobs at the tannery, and the White Lake, they did not make cuts, so they served this area well. So, there's always, it's not that you're condoning what happened, but there's always a little more to the story. Mm-hmm. Jan, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I think one of the comments you just made resonated with me, because when I watched, and I've watched about a dozen of these so far, one thing that struck me was that I too would like to hear from one of the executives, if you will, at Hooker or DuPont. I think if we're going to do future interviews, that would be, and you could find someone who was in that capacity. Because the Dexter King interview was
Dexter
very...
King, he was a manager.
Well, but he was at Genesco, at the tannery. But there was nobody, none of the key management personnel. I don't even know if they're around.
Wayne was the plant manager. He's no longer alive. And then the DuPont, even the more recent ones have not, they're not likely to. I know some of the more recent ones from the 80s, and so we're going to keep trying.
You ask about surprising things, and I think it was actually Dan's tape that probably threw me the biggest curveball. When you told the story about, the Sunday afternoon rides, and the fact that only you and the Hooker families your father and the Hooker families were notified of that. And we were talking about this a little bit before the session tonight, but it struck me that a company could be that callous to knowing that there was a poisonous gas being released to only notify its employees and not notify the public at large. Now, I know that, you know, certainly most companies have a paternalistic attitude and they'll take care of their employees, and Hooker obviously fit that category, but still it's rather shocking to think that something that potentially tragic could occur and yet the public wasn't notified. I mean, we had radio and television back then. Something could have been done. It's just, I think that was one of the big surprises to me. It'd be interesting to talk to a management person back then and ask them, what were you thinking? Why didn't you let the public know more about what you knew? So.
Although TV wasn't hugely in evidence in the 50s here. I mean, I mean, until the 60s.
Not as much. Radio, but radio certainly was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Radio, everyone listened to radio then. So.
That's right.
We'll go to Claire and then back to Roger.
If they had notified the public, then on their side, that's admitting they've done something wrong, and notifying the public they've done something wrong. Well, then you opened it up for all kinds of action to happen, and I'm sure they didn't want anything to happen.
They might have had a panic.
More than likely, they told their employees, "Now keep this under your hat, but go take a ride."
To Claire and then back to Roger.
Well, what you were saying made me think of, I just finished reading a book called Tom's River that I would recommend to everybody. I think it's Dan Fagan is the author. But it was really, that story really paralleled what we experienced here in the White Lake area. And the author really goes into depth to talk about what was going on. And there were things similar to this Sunday afternoon ride. There was a time when they knew that this one set of wells was contaminated, but it was summertime and water was always in short supply in the summertime, so they didn't tell anybody.
Who was the author of that?
Dan Fagan, I think, F-A-G-I-N, Tom's River.
Dan's River or Tom's?
Tom's River.
Tom's. Yeah, too many Dans.
What river was it?
It's the name of the town. It's in New Jersey, or the
really
city.
River, yeah.
I mean, there are so many similarities. This was an experienced company that made dyes, Seba, I think it's called.
Spaghetti?
Yeah, they made dyes, and they had already polluted other areas, so they were very good at it. They knew to look for someplace by water and someplace with sandy soil, because it was much better for getting rid of your waste and saving yourself money, you know, for yourself and your stockholders. And let me see what else. It just, they knew that if people don't see your factory, there's not as many complaints, so they had woods all around their factory, which made me think, well, that's kind of how DuPont was, you know. They were surrounded by woods, so you didn't really see that they were there.
Tanya and I got involved with landfills. That first fight that we had that we were together on. Compound what you said. There was an interesting white paper done by garbage industry consultant. And it said very succinctly, forget about the East Coast, forget about the West Coast, too many educated people. You go to small rural towns, you go to poor towns, where they, you know, not a lot of activism, that type of thing. So they, you know, Montague, you know, you pick Montague, Whitehall, White Lake, you know, conservative, loyal, naive people, and that's where, you know, you would go. And that was, that paper came out, of course, you know, whistleblower type thing. I don't know if you remember that.
Well, the term was Lulu's.
Yeah.
Locally undesirable, something else.
Yeah, and that's what they said, that that's where they were going to, you know, the waste managements of the world were going to locate their landfills, in the Midwest or the Deep South, where, of course, a lot of poor people, and they weren't, you know, active in the Midwest.
And they wouldn't have people with a lot of education.
Right.
Lawyers that would rise up and organize opposition.
But yeah, I thought this was a great, you know, back to the point of the question, I thought I would learn so much. The diversity of the people. And I brought back a lot of memories of some of the people that were there. By the way, Dexter King's wife was my cousin. So I had another relative.
You're probably related to all.
All of them, yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
For anybody who saw these, anything you learned or anything that surprised you, Tom?
I need to pick up with Jan spoke about companies being Cali, what you're speaking about, where companies are located. There's a whole segment of fisheries history and everything that's not been brought out in the project. But I want to pick up on the company part. After I left Fish and Wildlife Service, I went to work for a chemical company just to see what it's like. Not many people would do that, but I did that. And in this particular case, I went to work for Sun Chemical Company, which is a complementary to Hooker Chemical. They're located out in the woods. They're located on sandy soil, not Eggleston Township, and so on. At the time, I'm a member of the White Lake Public Advisory. The Muskegon Lake Public Advisory was trying to keep an eye on Sun Chemical. My very first day of work was when the the oxide cloud blew at Lomax next door. That was my first day of work.
Wasn't that Earth Day?
Lomax.
Lomax, that was Earth Day.
Yeah. So, now, what I'm going to tell you is that when you say Cali, we were working with Thailand. It's a cleaning solvent for pigment. And 25 parts per billion would put the company in violation with the wastewater system. They didn't worry about that. The guys that are working at that company knew, and the people at the county, and the county knew, and they always joked back and forth how they could get away with that. On my job, I'm using 5 to 10 gallons of it freely per day. I had nosebleed starting the first week. I worked for 6 months, left, no nosebleed after I left. But during that time, the Muskegon Lake Public Advisory Council came through and gave a tour, much like what would happen if the White Lake Public Advisory would do a tour here. We always knew when the tours were coming. The Thailand thing was put away, the cans were put here, and the Muskegon Lake Public Advisory, which is some of my relatives, walked 3 feet away from where I was working. I just smile and then report later. So it's still going on today. The people I'm referring to that were joking about how they got away with the wastewater system work for the county today. They transferred from Sun Chemical to Muskegon Chemical. A lot of the stuff that you are experiencing today, please take all the credit, and you've done a wonderful job coming so far cleaning up White Lake. Please don't let your guard down. Everything is still continuing on. And when I went to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, watching the Hooker Chemical go over to St. Louis and the other rivers, watching them, the story from that end of the spectrum, the hardest part for me and everything around White Lake is how do we stop from repeating the same mistake over again? I don't know how to do that because I have an older generation of people here that recognize their mistake. We have a generation that's trying to correct it. And now I see another whole generation that is rebelling and going right back to the old ways of the younger generation. So please, you've done a great job. I appreciate everything you've done, and please continue.
Any other from the audience on, and we're gonna have to watch our time because it's getting a little late, and so what I'm gonna do is get audience on surprises and new knowledge, and then I have another question for the panel.
I was surprised to hear Rand Barfoot say that he got his own jar, sent in a sample, to be independently tested on the same line as Norm about that white sheet of paper. He didn't want to trust the info that was coming. He wanted to have an independent verification from his own specimen of what was going on. And we were all supposed to ask any of you, are there other people that you think we ought to be interviewing? And I don't know if I'd say that as a general question here to the audience.
Just to save time, if there are people, we, like I mentioned, the project is done next week, and we're going to apply for additional funding. Obviously, we're going to do more interviews. And keep in mind, we sat around and brainstormed names. I got on the whitepages.com, tried to search people. Some people have passed away. Some people were not to be found. For example, if anybody knows how to find Darwin Bennett, could not find him. I really want to interview him.
Lake Odessa. I can.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Awesome. Okay, but also, sometimes there's someone that's not an obvious one, like Darwin Bennett, who was the editor of the paper, and things like that. And then also, I talked to quite a few people. Well, not quite a few, but a number of people in particular. Some of the workers who were just they're too hesitant. So, we got quite a good bunch right now. But if and when we get funding again, we'll start that up again. So what I would like to have is to have people just, you can put names on the website or you can give them to me, but don't tell me. Don't tell me or don't tell me. It's not gonna work.
Nope.
Not gonna work.
It has to be written down.
Yeah, but a few more from the audience, and then we'll go back here on surprises or something that you learned.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Shelley.
Yeah.
I was surprised at how bad the pollution was. When you hear pollution, I've heard pollution all my life, and like you said, it just waves over you and you don't really think about it. And I really was surprised at how bad it was. And when I wasn't here, along with the interviews, I don't know if you're really aware of it, but the library was doing environmental education programs for the kids, and I've still got more to go. So whoever was talking about being concerned about that younger generation coming along, we're trying to instill in them, look at what you have. We brought in animals, and I got butterflies coming at the end of the month, and then it's June. This is what you have, isn't this wonderful? This is what will happen if pollution comes back. They won't be here anymore. So we are instilling that in young children. If you see a program that you think kids should be here, tell people, get them here. Usually animals will pack the room. But we want to do that. We want to make sure those kids understand, because they're growing up in this beautiful area. They don't know the pollution like those of us who have been through any of it, what it can do. And so help me out. Give me names of people who will do environmental programs. Donate funds, because those programs are not cheap. Those people do not come here for free all the time.
Well, another place is schools. If anyone's, I'm not as familiar right now with Montague schools, but I see Susan Tate doing a lot with her middle school at Whitehall.
You can also get flyers out.
Yeah. Any more from the audience on something you learned or something that surprised you? And is this a part of this question, Roger?
Yeah, a quick comment. Like, I came to the PAC meeting the other day, and they had the 3 students who had been sampling the water tributaries. And they had their cue cards, and it was a big deal because they were young and they were presenting to a bunch of older people, let's say. And then also the first meeting of the Historical Society, there's that wonderful teacher in Whitehall, and they get together, and Norm, you probably remember the name, but I don't remember her name. It was like the first meeting we do for the Historical Society.
Yeah,
and
Carlson.
Yeah, okay, and they get together with projects, and so we should feed them some projects on environment. And I mean, the one kid gave a Sherman antitrust presentation. He's a sophomore in high school. I mean, I was amazed at the intelligence of those kids. It was great.
Just done a super
Dan,
job.
did you have something else?
No, I'm just waiting for your next
question.
I have a bunch more questions, but we don't have time.
Yeah.
But I thought one question that I thought would be very useful to us is did the interviews raise questions that need answering? I mean, if we're going to look forward, you know, to the next part of the project, did the interviews, did you end up having questions that you would like us to know? And who hasn't gone as much here? So I want to call on the quiet students. I'll get to the ones who raised their hand.
I'll raise their hand right away.
Me. Dan?
Which Dan? This Dan? Okay,
Dan.
Three
Go
Dans
ahead.
here.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, not so much in the remarks, but I heard some of the panelists criticizing government as if the government was part of the problem. And I'm thinking back, this is the historian in me, to the early 20th century when we had a lot of the same problems nationally that we have today. And a president at the same time trying to cope with them by the name of Theodore Roosevelt, really our first environmentally conscious president. And a lot of the same problem, I mean, it's more than just environment. I mean, that's an important issue, obviously, but we've got this imbalance in wealth, for example. That was there. The same. We have powerful corporations that manipulated things, and that day is banks and railroads and steel companies and so forth. And so his solution was the square deal. There are 4 parts to the square deal. Big business, labor, the people, and government. And nowadays, of course, we're hearing nothing but bad-mouthing of labor, and we're hearing nothing but bad-mouthing of government. And of course, we can all criticize other people. But where are we going to get solutions? And the only answer I can come up with, people alone are not going to be able to stand up to these forces. We need government now. Right now, of course, we have people criticizing the government from both the left and the right. And what I'm arguing is we have to put faith, that's the only place I know of that's powerful enough at the national, state, and local level to do anything to help correct these problems. We haven't given enough credit to the governmental leaders who stood up and were willing to actually take a stand that might actually mean that they would lose their $500 a year job. You know, I mean, local government is not getting paid.
No.
I mean, and even our state legislators are not all that well paid, you know, considering what they could elsewhere be getting. So I think we need to give more credit to government, and we hear, you know, I'm a pessimist, I'm an optimist. I'm a pejorist, that's me. I would like to be optimistic, but the realist in me says, forget that. I mean, but I really do hope that there is some silver lining somewhere out there that government can help us to bring these things back into balance. I'm not saying get rid of big business. I'm just saying got to work together. It's in our best interest to be able to make these arrangements, to make agreements. That's my bottom line.
One thing to keep in mind too is that at the very least, we're a pretty good case study here in the White Lake area of working with both the state and federal governments, because the work that's been to clean up White Lake has been local people actually pushing in the state, and we've made sure that the state and federal agencies, the environmental agencies, have been able to do their job, and we've actually held them to a higher standard. Sure. So there is, I get kind of frustrated too when I hear people beat up on government, because I work with people from the state and from
and you're in the government.
Yeah, and that's right.
You're the only elected official here.
No, that's not true.
Well, we have one more.
Jan.
Okay. Jan, that's true. You got two.
But really, that,
we should have more.
It's very easy to oh, Terry, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
You got to speak up.
Speak up. Okay, we have 3.
It's very easy to beat up on government, but I can speak, I'm sure Jan, Terry, and I can speak that being on the other side, sometimes you see a little different, I can't, you see a little different story. It's very helpful to serve on these boards because then you get a little different picture. But we have been working with them, and it's been good. Roger, or Jan, you're next.
Yeah, I guess questions that need answering. The one thing that struck me, and I think couple of you mentioned this. Tom, you mentioned this in your remarks. A couple of others, you mentioned it too, that pollution is still going on. Pollution is still occurring every day in some way. And some forms, I think, are much more insidious than others. And I'm thinking especially of the pollutants that get into our wastewater system that aren't filtered out by our wastewater system. For example, there was a study done in Portland, Oregon about some of the drugs that are flushed down into toilets. And the study revealed that there was the equivalent of 400 Benadryl tablets a day being released into the Columbia River. That sort of thing is going on everywhere, and our wastewater system is not designed to screen those things out. Another example is a chemical that's very commonly used in cosmetics and antibacterial soap. It's called triclosan. Triclosan is used in soaps, in shampoos, in fabrics, but antibacterial soap is one of the major uses for it. And this chemical is prevalent in a lot of things. It's being dumped into our wastewater system. We know that it helps make bacteria resistant to antibiotics. So it's cutting down on the effectiveness of antibiotics. But there's no way to screen it out. Wastewater systems aren't filtering it. This is a problem that I think we face today, and it's something that we need to constantly be vigilant about, because as you said, Tom, pollution is occurring every day, everywhere. So.
Well, I mean, everything we make causes pollution. I mean, we're consumers. So your question then is, how do we address pollution? I mean, how do we deal with it? Pollution is still here. Nice, easy question
we may have cleaned it up in to some degree in White Lake, but the problem is still with us.
Yeah. Okay, keeping our questions our answers kind of to the point, Roger.
Well, I'm just going to pick up. I mean, you know, we do this number, and we know Chicago's down here, and this is the thumb, et cetera. And that somehow, you know, I spent like about 40 years living in California. California is dry, arid, and as of August, we'll read about the fires, which will be sweeping through, burning tens of thousands of acres, et cetera. And the water is always an issue, and on and on and on. Anyway, Michigan basically is about water. And so, like, I think, you know, we have to, above and beyond any other controls, that would be like federal or state. You know, the state of Michigan has to somehow be really tough and observant, pick up on what Dan is saying, you know, like, you got to get in there and you got to smash them in the head, you know, because basically we're about water. I mean, we're the 20% of the world's fresh water supply. We are the last gasp, and we sort of sit here and say, well, pollution just happens, you know, what do we do? You talk to, I had one thing, I won't go into the story, it's a hooker story, but anyway, and the response was, well, you know, Thanksgiving dinner, I was invited this guy named Henry Hooker. He goes to Topher Delaney, a friend, et cetera. Geez, you know, are you ready? Hooker? And he's a hooker, all right? And he said, oh, Roger, we haven't owned that. We sold that to Oxy years ago. So there's the old Dodge thing that somehow, that wasn't us. That was somebody else, you know. We sold that. The stock went here, whenever there, sort of thing, and I don't know, they moved to Palm Springs or something, you know. Right. But you know, not my problem, man.
Your question is?
Well, I'm just saying water. We're all about water.
Can I reframe it a little bit? Because I'm actually trying to look for some information to incorporate into our next project. So I don't necessarily want to solve the world's pollution problems in this panel. And not that that's not important to bring up, but questions relating to our environmental history and moving forward, specific to our community. So what questions do you have related to what happened here and us moving forward? Or is there information that you think you know, we need to
we can all learn and pass it on to the next generation, as it was said out there.
Well,
when we do have to watch our time.
Yes.
And I want to get to the audience.
For 3 years, I worked on the White Lake Area Cancer Mapping Project, and we had lots of conversations with people. Everybody wanted to tell their stories. But I would say there were probably as many people who talked about they grew up on a farm where pesticides were used, or they grew up near a farm where pesticides were used.
So questions
that
about
is,
farming.
Yes.
Well, it's not just chemical companies here, it's pesticides. And I just wanted to point out in Greg Mund's interview, if you watch that, he talked about us being good stewards. And, you know, we don't need all these lawns around here.
Yeah.
You know, we need native plants. And so, you know, how can we be good stewards ourselves here?
And we're watching our
I guess a couple of concerns I have going down to the futures, or into the futures. I had people, okay, is the DNR continuing to monitor existing industries in the area? I had, over the years, employees from every industry in this area tell me they always knew when they were going to be inspected. And I'm thinking, no, it can't be, but it was. Muskegon County, very cavalier when they created the county wastewater system. They said, come to Muskegon, we can treat your wastes. They were supposed to be monitoring all the industries. Didn't happen. It was not being done. I'd like to think the people that are there now are doing it, because they got themselves in some real trouble. And there are people getting bottled water because of the facility they ran outside of Whitehall. You don't hear much about it. One of the concerns I have long-term down the road is, and can we do anything about this? The power is shifting in Washington. As an area, we've had good support from both political party individuals in helping us with cleanup, but the power is shifting to the Southwest. Roger mentioned, you know, we have the Great Lakes. What's going to happen when these people out there get desperate for water? There's some places that are now. The Midwest no longer has the clout in Washington it once had. And I have this reoccurring nightmare that they are going to be lusting after our water like we have pumped their oil up here, you know? And for down the road, is there anything, action we can take? What are we going to do about that?
We're going to go to Dan.
Okay. One of the organizations that always has intrigued me is the River Keepers. And these, of course, are Robert Kennedy Jr., I think, was started on the Hudson River in New York. And basically what they do, they have volunteers with boats, and they go out and they monitor pipes just like the supposed agencies are supposed to monitor the pipes. And they're out and watching, and as you said with the pollution, we had, I mentioned an old friend a while back, Owen Davis. Lived in a bayou in Grand Haven area. And he was the Whit Dahlstrom of Grand Haven Spring Lake. Anyway, but he went all around that bayou and got everybody but one doctor to change their lawn treatment, as an example. He still wanted the green grass. But could possibly, and of course the River Keepers go with volunteers a lot, but they get a boat and they do stuff. And I don't want to turn into some sort of, you know, power mad little type of organization, but could there be such a monitoring group? Similar, I mean, the PAC is obviously working with different, but a monitoring group and possibly going to the schools. But the kind of the river keeper concept of an activism type of a group to go out and watch, and watch and be proactive.
Now, the audience, and this will be our last question, just because we're going to your time, and then hopefully you'll help us through. But let me ask the question again. Did the interviews raise questions that need answering? Did the interviews, when you watched the interviews, did you end up having questions like, I'd like to know more about this, or, you know, they brought up a story. I'd like to explore that a little bit more.
I was struck by Rand Barfoot commenting, well, we spent $700,000 to acquire land, we spent another $280,000 for legal fees. And every time I did the math, it came real close to $1 million there for public money, Whitehall City Council funds.
Yes.
And I think it would be really hard for any council these days to do that and still stay in office. I think they'd get, you know, tarred and feathered or something equivalent, you know.
Well, we spent Whitehall City Council spent quite a bit on our Green Street.
On the Green Street.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was done well.
We bought our attorney, who was one of the top environmental attorneys in the state, Mike Ortega. We bought him a lot of nice cars, sent his daughter to U of M through the medical school, but it was fine. I think it was a great thing to do because it put the city at the table with the DNR and Genesco. And if anyone wasn't happy about that, it was the state. They had a man from the AG's office who just sat there and glared.
I want to toss Dan Parker's remark right back. As opposed to a volunteer group and monitoring, is there a way to institutionalize, to have it perpetuate, whether that's through Grand Valley, through Al Steinman, here in Muskegon, or through other similar bodies, so that you know that the monitoring will go on for 5 years, 10 years, a generation, because it won't do any good if you and I do it, and then you and I die, and nobody else does.
Yeah, and there's probably a longer question than we have time for to answer. But I would like to encourage you to sign in, because just put your email if you want to be on the project list, otherwise just sign in for numbers. Have this that we are required to give to everybody at any one of our meetings to fill out. It's from the Michigan Humanities Council. By the way, Alcoa Haunap, Friends of the White Lake Community Library, Montague Museum and Historical Association, White Lake Area Historical Society all contributed to the project. But these, please fill out. On the back, I would like you to do one more thing for me. And just, you know, if you haven't seen the interviews on the website, but from watching what you saw tonight, if you could put 2 or 3 just common themes that came across to you, that would be helpful to us. That's one more question I kind of wanted to get to that we didn't have time for. But, you know, what are the common themes that kind of ran through those interviews? And that would be really helpful to us as we look towards the next stage of the project. So I want to thank everybody for...
One last thing.
Wait. Let me say my last thing. And then
it's about you.
Yeah.
No, nothing about me. No, I just want to thank the panelists for
thank you.
I know Dan came here and he was studying all day those interviews because he doesn't have a computer at home, and appreciate
driving her staff crazy, right?
Appreciate what they're doing and appreciate and we're on the website, which is restoringwhitelake.com. There's a feedback button. You know, if you go home and you have some thoughts, you know, not even related to the questions, you know, give us your feedback. We'd certainly like to hear this. This is kind of the start of the project for us. So, surveys, and then now what?
Tanya, I really think that White Lake has had a tremendous cleanup, and it's come a long way, and it's been because of all the people that were involved in it. And I think if it hadn't been for the citizens, the people living here, and their efforts, it would not have happened. I really, really honestly believe
we're a good success story.
Tom, you, and all the other folks and the people in this room are here because they are interested, they care, and that's what did it.
I think we would have gotten something. I think.
But it would have never been what it.
Not what we needed.
And we're not done yet.
And we're not done.
No. Remember, folks, still DuPont to deal with.
Yes.
Well, and a few others.
And
so.
some others.
Anyway, thank you very much, and help us finish up with the refreshments.
And as you leave, come by and look at my little booklet that we're publishing. It's a listing of organic farmers in the area. So no pesticides in here.
Tips in general.
Where
it's a map of Well, in a couple more weeks, we'll have the mass printing out. It's a map of all the local organic farmers. Our own are Mund Farm, Semmelbauer Farm, Shoals, September's Herbs and Produce, Diana Jansek's
And where are they going to
farm.
be? Where can you get them?
We're gonna, if you have any ideas where you would like to see them distributed, let me know. If you want to be a supporter and have your name on the back page, then you'd have to see me tonight about that, because tomorrow's our deadline for that.
Farmers market, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they have any organic.